So it was about 2 years ago, but there was this one Excel formula that really helped me complete my capstone project for my Master of Education degree. Knowing this formula saved me a lot of time because I wanted to see how many students in the institution that I teach at passed or failed their MOS exams over a 4-month period. That's over 1,200 students. Imagine trying to track that manually. With one formula, I was able to see how many students passed or failed in seconds. And knowing this formula and applying it a few times in my capstone project allowed me to achieve my Master of Education. So that's why I wanted to share with you these Excel formulas so that you can have the same success, whether it's completing an Excel assignment, whether it's preparing for a job interview, or maybe like my students, you're completing your Excel associate exam. These Excel formulas will help you prepare for anything. This tutorial is unique because we're going to go over tons of real-world examples of how to use Excel formulas to solve everyday Excel challenges. Hi there, my name is Mike and I'm an educator who strongly believes in accessible education that helps you unlock new opportunities. And one way we're going to do that in this video is to show you all of the Excel formulas that you should know. And all of these formulas are on the official Microsoft's Associate Excel exam. So we're going to look at mathematical operators, summary functions, text functions, and conditional functions as well. So we'll get started. I've got a list of all of the formulas we're going to use in this video today. And if you see one that you want to skip to, just take advantage of the timestamps that I'm going to post in the description box below this video, but make sure to stick around to the end of the video where I will reveal the one formula that helped me complete my Master of Education capstone project. The first group of formulas we'll go over are the mathematical operators, and the four main ones obviously being addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. But if you were just starting formulas in Excel, you might not know where some of these key symbols are and how to use them in Excel. And the main thing when you're starting formulas is to always remember to put the equal sign. You'll be amazed at how many students get to their test and they go to use a formula like add the number 4 and 6, and they just start typing the cell reference in without putting the equal sign. So when we're starting formulas, always start with that equal sign. And also I've got two real-world examples how some of these mathematical operators and using cell references in the real world can be a pain, but I'll show you how you can solve some of those real world challenges. But first, we'll get into how to add these numbers. So you just type equal. Again, we start with a formula, start with the equal sign on your keyboard. And then I'm going to use this number as a cell reference. So we're going to add 4. And then I'm going to press Shift and the plus sign on my keyboard. And then we're going to add this cell D3. Press Enter. And then we've added the two numbers. For subtraction, pretty much the same thing. Started with equal. We'll use the 7 as a cell reference, put the minus, or on your keyboard it would be a hyphen, -3, or cell D4, and then press Enter again. For multiplication, it's the star button, sort of press Shift and the 8 key on your keyboard. So it would be equal. We'll use this 4, and then press Shift, and then the star, or this little symbol above the number 8 on your keyboard. And then put in the this cell reference, press Enter, and now we've multiplied 4 by 7. The last one, we're going to divide 25 by 5. So you would type in equal, and then use this cell reference. The divide key is just a slash, so just a slash right beside the Shift key on your keyboard. And then this cell reference here, D6, and press Enter. So that's how you would complete your most popular mathematical operators in Excel. Now let's try some real-world examples. For our first real-world example, we want to multiply the value in cell E4 by the value in D1. So to get the tax rate, we have to multiply the unit price by the tax rate given, and then hopefully that'll work for the other numbers as we move down the unit price column and apply it to the tax column. So we'll see how that works. We'll type in equal, so always start formulas with the equal sign, and then we're going to use the first value here as the cell reference, and then we're going to multiply that. So whenever you're trying to gather tax rates and stuff like that, usually you have to multiply something by the tax rate. And then, so the tax rate is here. There's only one problem. So when I press Enter, it's going to work for the first cell, but you'll notice something a little strange about the numbers as the formula gets copied down. Okay, so what happened there? The first cell works, but going down not so much. We get these weird numbers. We obviously know that 50 times 8% is not 1,000. So what happened there? Well, because we didn't put an absolute cell reference, what happened was when we get down to here, the values in the unit price kept going down, which we actually wanted, but we didn't want the value of the tax rate to move anywhere. We wanted it to keep applying to that same cell. So what we have to do is create an absolute cell reference, and an absolute cell reference is a part of your worksheet that's not going to go anywhere. We're going to sort of lock it into that one specific cell. So when we go back to this initial formula, all we have to do is click on the cell reference D1 and then press F4. That's going to lock in, create an absolute cell reference. It's not going to go anywhere when the formula gets copied down to the rest of the cells in this column. So when I press enter, now we get our true numbers here. All of these keep coming back to the tax rate in cell D1 because we created an absolute cell reference, which is sort of a non-moving part of our worksheet. And I'll show you how you could also lock in a number using name ranges in the next example. So for our second real-world example using mathematical operators in Excel, we want to multiply or create a formula that multiplies the Q1 value, and then we want to multiply it by the projected Q2 increase. So the projected Q2 increase is right here, but instead of using this as an absolute cell reference like we did in the last example, let me show you how to create a name range and how you can use it within a formula. So to create a name range, I think the simplest way to do this is to just click on the range that you want. It could be a whole range of cells or just one cell. We want to create a name range just from the number in this cell here. So we'll click on this cell, and then I'll take away, so now that its name is called B14, but we want to give it a more unique name. So maybe we'll call it Q2. Again, this can't have spaces in it when you're creating a name. So if you want to have something that's separated by a space, you have to use an underscore when you're naming a range or a cell. Q2 increase. Okay, so that's the name that we're giving to that value. And now when we use it in a formula, we're going to click the equal sign or create the equal sign to start our formula. We want to multiply this value by that Q2 projected increase. So we're going to click here and then use the multiply symbol. And then, oh, I almost did it. I almost used that cell reference. So if we start typing in the name that we just created, Q2, you see the name range pops up here. And we can just double click on that, and then it'll always refer to this. We don't have to use an absolute cell reference. So when I press enter and then I go to copy this down, it'll apply that number to these cells. So you see that all of the values were multiplied by this cell, and we don't have to use an absolute cell reference. So that's two ways you can kind of hold on to one cell reference. You can use an absolute cell reference or create a name range or a named cell to help you out. Now we've got our summary functions. So we've got a range of numbers, and we're going to use those summary functions to calculate them. So first of all, again, these are formulas as well. So you have to type in the equal sign, and the sum is going to give us our totals of the three numbers. So we're going to type equal sum, open parentheses, and then get this range here. So I'm just going to highlight this range and then close parentheses and press enter. So that's how you could do the equal sum formula. You can also use auto sum, but if you've got a small range of numbers, this is probably the quickest way to add this all together. So equal sum, put in the range, open close parentheses, press enter, and we've got the total of those three numbers. Next, we're going to get the average. So the average function goes like this. It's equal average, open parentheses, highlight the range again. It's going to give us the middle number between these three. That's my best explanation of what the average is, the mean, or the number that's sort of in the middle of these three numbers in a range. So we'll close parentheses, press enter. So equal average, open parentheses, grab the cell reference or the range, close parentheses, press enter, and you'll get kind of the average of that range. For the min, we're looking for through a range, and we're looking for the smallest number. So min is the smallest number, and you would type it like this. So that's what, if you're looking for the smallest number in a range or the lowest number, let's say I want to see If I'm looking through students' grades and I want to see what the lowest mark on the exam was, I would just type in equal min, highlight all the marks, and then press enter, and it would tell me what the lowest mark on the exam is. So just like this, we'll type equal min, open parentheses, and then highlight the range, close parentheses, and press enter, and then we've got our lowest number out of the 3. And then the opposite one to that would be max, which is the highest number. So now you're looking for the highest score in a range. You would type in equal max, open parentheses, and highlight this range, and then close parentheses, press enter, and now we've got the highest score in that range. Count and the different count variations. So there's 3 count variations you should know. How to count anything, and how to count blank cells. So the normal count function is only going to count numbers. It's unique in that it doesn't count how many, let's say in the count A area, it's not going to count anything that's not a number, but count A will do that. So as an alternative, if you have values with names in them, you can use the count A. If you have numbers, you can just use the normal count function. So I'll show you the count function. Count function is just going to tell us, it's not going to get the total of the actual numbers, but it's going to tell us how many cells actually have numbers in them. All right, so if I had my students' marks, but I just want to see how many students completed the exam, I could go over the marks and it would tell me I've got 26 students based on how many marks I've filled in, or how many marks I've completed so far. So how you would write that, you do equal count, open parentheses, and then we'll get this range. Now you see that there's 2 values, so should actually tell you that there's 2 here. So when we do equal count, open parentheses, highlight the range, and then close parentheses, press enter, it should tell us we have 2 values in that range. So be careful with that. When you're not getting the total, you're getting the total number of numbers in a range. And then for this one, let's say I've got, I want to count how many friends I have. These are all my friends' names. I only have this many friends. So count A will allow you to count anything in a cell. It'll count anything. So the A, I don't know if it officially stands for anything, but for me, that's how I remember that. So count A will count anything, whether it's numbers or text values or anything like that. So count A stands for anything. Okay, and we'll highlight this range, see how many friends I have, open parentheses, close parentheses, and press enter. I've got 3 friends. So count blank is a little bit of a variation. So it's going to look through a range. Let's say I didn't put in the marks for my students who didn't show up to the exam, and I want to count how many students didn't show up to their exam, especially if I have like 500 students and I just leave the cell blank if they didn't show up. This would help me kind of calculate how many students didn't show up. So I want to see how many blank cells there are. So I would type in equal count blank, and it's right here. It's a long name. So count blank, open parentheses, highlight this range, close the parentheses, and press enter. And it's going to tell me there's 1 blank cell in that range, which we could see with our eye. Now let's try a real-world example of these summary functions. Okay, so let's say I want to gather some insights about how my students did this semester, and I'm going to use these summary functions to give me a little bit more insight of how well they did, what the highest marks or lowest marks were, and that kind of thing. And the first place we're going to start is in cell C12, and I'm going to, because sometimes when I play around with the assessments every semester, I just like to see that it adds up to 100%. If I'm changing the weight of certain grades and things like that. Even though if I could eyeball it and be like, yeah, that looks like 100%, I'll just sometimes total it just to make sure. So the way we're going to do that in cell C12, just add up all the percentages, make sure it adds up to 100%, is use that sum function. So equal sum, open bracket, I'm going to highlight this range, and then I'm going to close the parentheses, press enter, and sure enough, it adds up to 100. So that's great. So that's how you can use the sum function. The average function, let's say in cell F8, I want to get the average of our exam 1. So I want to see how well my students did on their first exam, just by getting kind of an average of how they did, and what the kind of middle number was of all the exam scores out there. So I'll type in equal average, open parentheses, and then I'm going to highlight the exam 1 range, starting from the first mark to the last mark here. And then I'll hop up. I can, if you have like a long list like I do and you can't kind of reach the original place where you put the formula, you can use the formula bar here to complete the formula. So I'm going to close the parentheses, press enter, and it's going to tell me my number up here, which is, okay, that's a pretty good average, 84.3. Now we're going to use the min. Now I want to see which student kind of didn't do so well. So who got the lowest score, or what was the lowest score on the exam, to sort of get a range between my lowest and highest mark. So I'll do equal min, open parentheses, and again I'll use that same range, copy it all the way down to my last student here, and then I'll use the formula bar to close the parentheses and press enter, and then I've got my minimum mark here, which is 52. It's not bad. My lowest mark is still a pass, so that's a pretty good exam, or pretty good students. Anyways, so my highest mark, which I can see at the top clearly, but sometimes not all your students are going to get 100% on their exams, so you can use the equal max formula to see what the highest mark would be, open parentheses, and I'm going to highlight the range again, and then use the formula bar to close the parentheses, press enter, and now I've got kind of a good range. So the exam potential could have ranged from 100% to 52%. So that's a pretty good range. That's what you kind of want on tests, is like, you know, was there an opportunity to do really well, and was there a wide range? So it wasn't just like all students getting an A or all students failing. You kind of want a good range in there if you're creating exams. So the next formula would be the count function, or the count formula, and we're going to count that one in cell B5, and I'll show you where it wouldn't work. So this would work if we use the same range that we use for our other formulas in exam 1, but it wouldn't work if I was doing the student ID formula, or sorry, the student ID range, because these have hyphens in it and that doesn't calculate hyphens. So for that one, we have to use count A. But for the first one, we could use, if you wanted to see how many students maybe attended exam 1, you could say count, and then highlight the exam 1 range. Again, so if you left the cell blank because a student didn't show up, it wouldn't count that. So it's to show you how many students showed up to the first exam. So equal count, because it would count all the numbers. And then for this one, the student ID area, you'd have to use count A, because the normal count function, like I said, would not calculate anything with text or hyphens or punctuation in it. So we'd have to use count A if we only had that one to gather how many students showed up. So we'd have to use count A for that range, and we just highlight that range all the way down. So maybe if I was calculating like how many students were in the class using the student ID range versus how many students actually showed up to the exam, I'd use count versus count A. So count A would calculate the hyphen, and good thing to know, all of my students showed up for that, at least for that first exam. Now, if we want to see how many students missed the final exam, you could use the count blank. So this would work if instead of putting in a 0 for the students that didn't show up, you just left the cell blank. So I could calculate how many students did not actually show up for their final exam. Maybe if their students were doing really poorly on the in the class and they didn't have a chance to pass the class, maybe they didn't show up. I don't know why they wouldn't show up, but count blank would allow you to calculate how many cells were left blank in a range. So equal count blank, open parentheses, highlight that range, and then so without kind of having to manually track how many students didn't show up, this will calculate it easily for us, and we'll just close the parentheses, press enter, and it tells us that we've got 3 students who missed their final exam. Now we're on to text formulas, and what they do is alter text in your Excel worksheet. There's tons of them out there, but I thought I would focus on the most common ones. So the first one that we're going to use is the concat formula, and it used to be called concatenate, but the 2019 Excel version likes you to use concat, not concatenate. So that's the one we're going to use, and it's really a way to, the concat formula will allow us to join text strings together. So let's say in this example, I want to join the first name in text 1 with the last name in text 3. By the way, Mike James Carter is my full name, but we want to ignore the middle name and just join the first and last names together. So the way we would do that is type in equal concat open parentheses, and then click on the first text string, and then we'll put a comma, and then pick our next text stream. In the real world example, we'll add a more complicated example than this one, but this is just a very simple example using the concat function, and then we'll press enter, and then we join those two text strings together and left out my middle name. For the upper formula, what it's going to do is take a cell or cell reference and then capitalize all the letters within the word. So if we use this Toronto as an example, see how it's all lowercase letters. If we add the upper formula to this, so we'll type equal upper, and then open parentheses, we'll grab this cell reference here, cell B19, close the parentheses, press enter. Now you can see all the letters in that text are now capitalized or in uppercase. For the left one and the right one, let's say we want to create like a code and we only want to use the first three letters of a word to create the code. We're going to type in the equal left formula, open parentheses. What you need is the text, so the actual text that you're using. So let's say for this Paris example, and then how many characters from the left do you want? Do you want to use one letter from the left, or two or three? Let's say in our example we want 3, so I'm going to separate the text from the number of characters. So we've got the cell reference there that we need, and then how many characters from the left do you want to create? So we want, let's say, the first 3 letters. So if you have to create something with the first 3 letters, that's the left. If you want to create something with the last 3 letters, that would be the right formula that we're going to use in our next example. So we'll say we want to use the first 3 letters of this word to create a code, close the parentheses, press enter, and now we have the first 3 letters of Paris in there. For the right, it's the same thing, equal right, but it's the opposite because we want to get the last 3 letters of the place that we're using in the example. So we'll use the text. Let's use Dallas as the example. We'll put a comma, and then again we'll put 3, and that'll kind of use the last 3 letters of the text that we're using. So we'll press enter, and then we have the last 3 letters in Dallas. Okay, let's try some real world examples now. So let's use a text formula that allows us to join the first name in our employee list with the company email, averysicecream.ca. So do you remember which formula we would use to join those 2 text strings together? It would be the concat formula. So if I want to generate new email for our new employees using their first name and then also the company email, averysicecream.ca, we can do it like this. So we can type in equal concat, open parentheses, so we want to use the employee's first name, and then I'm going to open this function dialog box to show you how you can use that. So function arguments, the first text string is the first name. I like using this dialog box because it'll show you a preview and show you if you've done this correctly. So when you're typing in text in a text box here, remember to put quotations around it. So open quotation, the text 2 would be at Avery's ice cream.ca, and then close quotations around it. And then you can see kind of a little preview here. So Avery's ice cream.ca, press OK, and then we've got sort of a company email name here. Now we've got a more challenging example because we're going to modify a formula by adding another formula on top of it. So it's called embedding a formula within a formula. And you'll notice that when we click in the first cell here, so D2, you see the left formula in the formula bar to generate the city code. But what we want to do now is also add something without getting rid of this formula. We want to add a formula to this that'll allow the city code to be displayed in uppercase letters. So you remember that we use the upper formula, but how can we add it to the left formula without getting rid of the left formula? Because if we get rid of the left formula, that's just going to get rid of the already existing city code, and that's not what we want. We just want to modify it by adding a uppercase effect to the city code. So what we can do is in between the equal and left, we'll add in the upper formula. So upper, open parentheses. And because we created kind of another formula within a formula, we also have to close the formula at the end. So we have to add another close parentheses. So now we just kind of wrap the upper formula around the left formula. And when we press enter, you can see that the city code is now generated with uppercase letters. So that's really cool. You can add in two formulas together to get a effect like this. Okay, so now we're on to our conditional formulas, and these are formulas that are based around certain conditions or criteria that we set up. So the first one, the if formula, will evaluate a logical test that you set up, and then it'll tell you whether it's true or false. And this works really well if you want to evaluate a long list of numbers, and you want to see, you know, how many of those numbers meet a certain criteria, like how many passed or how many failed. Which ones are best sellers or average sellers, or that kind of thing. So in this first example, we're going to evaluate the cell in C24, and we want to see if it's greater than, let's say if we've given ourselves a logical test, if the price of the shirts in our t-shirt department, if they sell for more than, if we can sell them for more than $40, then they tend to be a best seller. If people are buying them at $40, they'll be a bestseller. If not, then we'll leave the cell blank. So we have two outcomes, a true statement and a false statement, and a logical test. So does the value in the cell, is it greater than 40? So this is what that would look like. We'll type in equal if. So the if function will evaluate a logical test and then kind of two different outcomes, two opposite outcomes. So our logical test here is this the value in the cell, so C24, is it greater than 40? Now if it's not, so the next part of this formula that I'm going to separate with a comma is what happens if this is true. Okay, so if it's above 40, we're going to put the value, open quotation marks, bestseller. So it's a bestseller if we can sell it for over $40. And then you can say like not a bestseller in the false statement, but one really great thing if you want just kind of nothing to show up is just to put open quotation marks and close quotation marks and then close the parentheses. There we've got our three parts, the logical test, the true statement, and the false statement, which is going to be nothing. So I press enter and the formula is there, but because it didn't meet the logical test, nothing showed up. But if I copy this down, you can see that it does work, because where the values are greater than 40, it pops up and gives us our true statement versus the false statement. But I'm gonna undo that because I want to leave space for the remaining formulas in this section. The second and third types of formulas that we're going to perform now is the sum if and average formulas. So they're pretty similar. One gets the sum of a certain range and one gets the average. It's not like the sum and average functions without the if, because it's based on a condition. So for example, in the first one, if we want to get the total number or the total sales, but only for blue shirts. So see what I did there? So there's a condition there. We don't want all of the prices and then add up the total. We want to add up the total, but only for blue shirts. So how can we do that? Well, we'll type in equal sum if, open parentheses, and then our range is based on the criteria. So the range that we have to look at is the types of shirts. So types of shirts is what we're going to look at, and then we're going to separate that with a comma, and our criteria is blue shirts, which I have to put in quotations because it's a text value. So blue shirt. Okay, and then the sum range. So which range are we actually summing based on the criteria? So I'll separate the next part with a comma, and then I'll highlight all of the prices, and it's only going to generate the totals for the blue shirts, which is kind of nice. So we can have like two different totals if you wanted, where you get the totals of blue shirts and red shirts, and then you could compare and see which one is selling more and that kind of thing. So we'll press enter, and that's our totals, but only for the blue shirts. Now the average if formula is very similar to that. So let's say we're going to look at red shirts now, and we want to get the average selling price of red shirts. So notice how there's a condition there. I don't want the average for all of the numbers, just the ones that are associated with the red shirt value. So it's average if, open parentheses. Now again, the range is based on the criteria. So the range isn't the price, it's the range under the description. Okay, so the range red or blue shirt, we're looking for, this time we'll look for the red shirt ones. And notice how capitals don't matter when you're referring to a place like a text value. Capitals don't really matter. And then the last part, again, just like the sum if formula, we're going to separate this with a comma and then highlight all of the number values. And then it's only going to select the ones that are associated with the red shirt value. So we'll close parentheses, press enter, and that's your average, but only for red shirts. So see how it's kind of like the sum and the if formulas, but there's a condition there. So that's what separates the sum if from the sum and the average if from the average formulas. Okay, so the count if is even a little bit easier. So we're just gonna see how many red shirts do we have in our company. So how many different red shirts were entered based on our examples, and obviously it's 2, but if you had a long list of like 500 different types, and there's like red shirts all over the place kind of thing, this would be a really easy way to count. So count if, and this is even a little bit more simple than the average and the sum ifs because there's only a range and then the criteria. So it's just those first 2 parts. So it's just the range based on the criteria. And I don't know, maybe we want to see the see how many blue shirts we have. So blue shirt. Okay, so we have the criteria, the range, close parentheses, press enter, and it tells you we have 2 entries named blue shirt. So that's how you could use the count if formula. So now we'll use our conditional formulas in a more of a real world situation. Let's say I want to see how many of my students passed or failed our class. So at the end of our class, the overall, let's say the passing grade is a 60. So we have our logical test. So we have our if function or if formula, because there's 2 outcomes. You either passed or you failed. And the logical test would be, is the value greater than 60? So I'm going to evaluate this first cell and then ask if it's greater than 60, and then I'll copy the formula down. So the way I would write that, start with the equal sign again, and then if, and then open parentheses. So my logical test is the value in this cell greater than 60? Okay, although I know most courses are above 50, we're just using this as an example. So that's our logical test. Is this value above 60? The true statement that comes with that, so I've separated the logical test from the true statement with a comma, and then I can type in pass, and then quotation marks. I'll separate the true statement from the false statement by putting a comma, and now we've got our false statement, which is fail. So fail in all capital letters, which seems overly mean, and within quotation marks. And then closing parenthesis, we'll press enter. Because this isn't a table, it didn't automatically copy the formula down like we did before. But if you want to copy this down manually, you would just grab onto the autofill handle and then just drag this all the way down and then release it here. And you can kind of get a sense for whether the student passed or fails. So it looks like we've got a lot more students who passed than failed our course. Okay, so now we're going to use the average if function in a little bit more of a challenging way than we did in our example. So let's say I want to really analyze these students who did well on their exams and see what did the average A student, so the average A student get on the first exam. So notice it's not just going to go through the first exam numbers and give you the average. It's based on a condition or a criteria that the mark has to be greater than 80 to be considered for this average formula, if that makes sense. So it'll only take in the numbers over 80 and then get the average from those numbers. So I can really look at, did my students just get over an 80, or were they like kind of crushing it? Is the average once you get past 80 like a 99 or something like that? And maybe that's, you can go into a deep analysis and why that might be. But to do that, you would write in equal average if, and then open parentheses. And I'll show you a little Excel hack if you want to save some time when it comes to highlighting information. So I'm going to click the first cell in this range, and then I'm going to click Control, Shift, and down. And that's going to highlight to the last value in the column. So if you ever want to do that really quickly, if you have a long list of things that you want to add into a formula, just press Control, Shift, and down, highlight the whole thing. So there's our range. In this one, the example, the range and the average range are exactly the same, but we just have to first tell this formula that we want to look through the range, and then the criteria, so I'll put this in quotation marks, is greater than the numbers that are greater than 80. And then end quotation marks, I have to put a comma, so now just to verify the range again. So the range being again B17 to B52. And then close parentheses, press enter, and it tells me that for the A students, the average was a 90. So for the, that's pretty, I guess that makes sense. For most of the students, they did pretty well. So it wasn't just like they were just getting over 80. A lot of them crushed it. Like you see a lot of 100s and high 90s and things like that. Okay, so that's how you use the average if. The sum if didn't make sense in this real world example, but it's pretty much the same thing where you have a range, a criteria, and then a sum range. So it doesn't make sense in this real world situation, so I'll skip it and we'll go to our count if formula. So let's say the final exam in our course is the Excel MOS exam, and the passing grade on that one is greater than 70. 70 or greater. So equal to 70 or greater would be a pass on that one. And I want to count the number of students who were able to pass. So I don't want, just like the function, I don't need it to tell me pass beside every student's name. I just want a count of how many students were able to either achieve a 70 or greater on the exam. So this is how you would write that. We would do equal count if, and then the range. Now I can't do my little trick where I did Control, Shift, and down because it only take me to here because there's a few students that didn't show up, and it would just take me to the next blank range, which is here. So for this one, I'm gonna just have to type in, I'll click the first, and then I know that it goes down to row 52, so I'm gonna type E52 in the formula, and then I'm gonna put a comma. We're looking for, in quotation marks, anything, a number that's greater than, actually I guess it would be greater or equal to 70. It's not just greater. If someone got 70, you wouldn't want it to say fail. So greater or equal to, that's how you could write that. And then 70, close parentheses, press enter, and it tells us that we've got 29 students who either scored 70 or above, and I think, out of 36, that's pretty good. So that's how you could use the count if formula. So I have one last challenge for you. Let me know how I would solve this problem. So this is basically what I did on my capstone project. I had to insert a formula in here that would look through the range starting in D3 all the way to D1216. And let me know how many students passed or failed based on this value. Which formula out of the ones I've shown you would you use to complete that task? Let me know in the comments if you figured it out, and let me know how you would write it as well. So thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.